From fighters letting out their inner comedians and asking for a raise, to dropping straight F-bombs and firing off insane callouts, Joe Rogan's post-fight interviews have it all. Let's look at some of the wildest callouts he's ever been a part of, starting with his heartfelt reaction to Dillashaw's bantamweight win. What so many people love about Joe Rogan is that besides being one of the best commentators in the game, he's also just a huge fan of the sport. And just like any other fan, he loves seeing an underdog claw his way to the top just like everybody else. Enter TJ Dillashaw, the extremely unlikely hero of the legendary UFC 173 bantamweight bout. He was put into a pretty unenviable position coming up against Renan Barão, basically a short-notice replacement with no time to train. Everyone was certain that Renan Barão would chew him up and spit him out in an easy win. But Dillashaw had something else on the cards for that night. After absolutely tearing at Barão for 4 rounds straight, he scored a technical knockout and raised the coveted belt. Looking at Joe in that post-fight interview was like looking at the happiest kid on the planet. As soon as he brought that mic out, he was nothing but praise for the underdog fighter. In fact, he straight up called it one of the best performances he had ever seen, and easily one of the best title matches. Of course, sometimes the post-fight interviews lead to less emotion and more to pure hilarity. After all, we all remember Moicano's expletive-filled love letter to New York. As fans, some of us wonder how commentators are able to keep a straight face during post-fight interviews. After all, ring warriors sometimes end up saying some really out there stuff when they're caught in the throes of victory. And can you blame them? Especially when they win fights that are pretty much unwinnable. You'd expect them to be a little excited, like when Moicano submitted Rydell in the first round of his UFC 281 fight. Now, while submissions are pretty common, you have to remember that Moicano came in as a replacement fighter with 5 days to prep. And boy, oh boy, he didn't spare any expense in letting people know exactly how he felt about his victory. Grabbing the mic from Joe and addressing the whole state of New York, the victor went into one of the funniest post-fight interviews ever. I won't go into all the F-bombs, but he did open up about his pre-fight prep, beer, and steaks. Obviously, he also proceeded to ask for a pay raise.
I want bonus. My colonel wants money.
Like the absolute legend he is. The best part of this was watching the normally calm and collected Joe immediately losing his mind at the words. He really tried keeping it together, but the man cracked up so hard he went into peals of laughter. These interviews can get pretty serious, so he probably just really appreciated the levity. Of course, this isn't the only time a fighter's absolutely bamboozled Mr. Rogan, like when Derek Lewis showed up in his underwear. No one can deny that the Black Beast put on an absolute clinic at UFC 229. The human bear of a fighter dismantled Volkov in the last 10 seconds of the match, a comeback victory for the ages. Now, given that Lewis is known for being a pretty funny dude, Joe was probably expecting at least some shenanigans during his post-fight interview. What he probably didn't expect was for the fighter to walk back into the ring in his underwear. Obviously, Rogan was a little confused by what he saw, taking a minute to collect himself and ask the question on everyone's mind. Dude, why? Lewis immediately gave the most basic and hilariously iconic answer he possibly could.
I'm here with the winner, Derek Lewis. Derek, why'd you take your pants off? My balls was hot.
The arena was pretty hot, leading to some, discomfort in his nether regions, to which Rogan gracefully and hilariously agreed. Lewis went on to launch into one of the funniest tirades in UFC history, name-dropping everything from Trump to the entire country of Russia. Of course, these interviews aren't always all happy-go-lucky. Sometimes they can get way too tense for their own good. Sometimes they have fighters ready to tear each other to pieces. DC is widely recognized as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. However, his road to cementing that title was an uphill battle that he had to fight for every inch of the way. After failing to properly beat Jones for years, people began to doubt his shot at being the best. Of course, the legend silenced all the haters when he knocked out Stipe at UFC 226 to become the heavyweight champion.
Oh, look at that 1-2 by DC.
And then he clinches. Exactly what you gotta do.
He got it done!
Of course, when Rogan went on the stage for the interview, he didn't expect he'd have to break up a brawl, which is exactly what happened when Cormier called out Brock Lesnar, who was in the crowd at the time. Lesnar didn't like that, storming the stage and shoving Cormier and insulting the whole division. Thankfully, Joe managed to calm everything down before a full-scale war could erupt in the octagon. But not before Lesnar grabbed his mic and shoved it right into the camera. Oof, talk about needing to control your temper. Thankfully, some interviews have rendered Rogan speechless in a good way, such as when Couture dropped one of the best one-liners in UFC history. For a lot of fighters, winning titles is a race against time.
Unanimous decision, and still the undisputed UFC light heavyweight champion of the world.
After all, there's only so much strain you can put your body through when you keep getting older and your opponents keep getting younger. Randy Couture's time, according to even his most diehard fans, was pretty much over. The man was pushing his mid-40s, fighting opponents up to a decade younger than him. Then, along rolled UFC 68, where he absolutely dominated Tim Sylvia, scoring a unanimous victory and the championship belt.
For the winner by unanimous decision, and now, once again, the new UFC heavyweight champion of the world.
Joe, for his part, kept things simple and clean, expressing that he had no idea what words could ever be sufficient to describe the spectacle he'd just witnessed. He simply passed the mic over to Couture, who proceeded to send the crowd into a flurry of cheers with one simple phrase. Not bad for an old man, huh? This fight was legendary because it showed what separates a Joe post-fight interview from any other. The simple fact that he knows when to keep quiet and let the fighter speak for himself. Now, dear viewer, you might be noticing that we haven't talked about one of his most iconic post-fight interviews yet, the one that shook the world. Obviously, I'm talking about McGregor's double belt extravaganza. New fans might not remember, but Conor's journey to his second belt was one of the most magical runs in UFC history.
Far enough away from danger as he starts teeing off.
Brandao looks hurt. Brandao looks hurt. This could be the end.
Big left.
This could be an early stoppage. Another
McGregor
first
comes
round
in.
for McGregor. This could be it.
That is it. It is
Wow.
over. And Conor McGregor.
He tore through two separate divisions, showing a kind of hunger that terrified his opponents.
Look at that uppercut. Now, Marcus
Over the
is
top, looking to finish it here. Conor McGregor, another first-round win. Wow! Ultra-impressive UFC debut.
Of course, his personality led to a lot of haters, with many fans and fighters wanting to see Mystic Mac fall. Unfortunately, the Irishman broke all their dreams in a stunning bout at UFC 205, pulling Alvarez from his throne. As he wore the two belts that he demanded Joe wrap around him, McGregor only had a few simple words for the eclectic interviewer: that he had nothing to apologize for to absolutely anything. After all, the double champ can do whatever he wants. It's like Rogan's very presence brings out the fire inside every fighter. There's no other explanation for how he has indisputably the most iconic post-game interviews the UFC has ever seen. Real really does recognize real, always. Well, folks, there's all the blood-pumping, hilarious, and electric Joe Rogan post-fight interviews we have today.